In South Africa, thousands of women and children face violence every single day. Behind every statistic is a story, a family, a life changed forever. For more than a century, the SAVF has stood as a pillar of hope, protection, and dignity, walking alongside survivors long before the 16 days of activism begins and long after it ends. At the SAVF, our mission is simple yet powerful: to protect the vulnerable, restore dignity, and empower survivors to rebuild their lives. Every year, thousands of South African women and children turn to the SAVF for safety, counseling, social support, and intervention. Our social workers stand at the front line, listening, guiding, and advocating when voices are silenced. Because GBV is not just a crime, it is a human rights violation, one that destroys families, futures, and communities. Through early intervention programs, trauma counseling, outreach services, safety planning, and partnerships with communities, SAVF offers survivors not only help, but hope. The 16 Days of Activism is more than a campaign. It is a call to action. A reminder that ending violence starts with all of us, in our homes, our schools, our workplaces, and our communities. You are not alone. At SAVF, someone is always ready to listen, support, and help you reclaim your strength. Stand with us. Speak out. Support survivors. Choose courage. Choose compassion. Choose change. During these 16 days and every day, the SAVF stands firm against violence and for the future of every woman and child in South Africa.
South Africa has one of the highest rates of domestic and gender-based violence in the world. When we speak about abuse, the focus is often on women, and rightly so. But there is another side we seldom talk about: men who are victims, men who are shamed into silence, and men who are not believed. Today we share the story of Erik Vermeulen. He is one of the many men in our country who have experienced domestic violence and chose to speak out, not only for himself, but for others who feel unheard. His story reminds us that the abuse does not discriminate and that every voice deserves to be heard. Good morning everyone, and welcome to another webinar focusing on our 16 Days of Activism campaign. Today we have the interview with Mr. Erik Vermeulen. Erik, very welcome to you, and thank you for availing yourself to be part of this webinar. Can you please introduce yourself for our viewers?
My name is Erik Vermeulen. I'm a behavioral strategist, and I work a lot with the psychology of decision making and behavioral psychology. In other words, what really drives us to behave the way we do, which is an interesting space to be in, particularly when I share my story. So in October 2019, I'd been dating a lady for about 18 months. We'd moved in together, and one Friday afternoon, she attacked me with a 5-pound hammer, which obviously set in motion this whole idea. But what was kind of really weird before that is one of my other clients had asked me as a keynote speaker to develop a keynote presentation on gender-based violence. More about the research behind it, the statistics behind it, and then trying to link that with the behavioral psychology, or what is it from a decision-making perspective that drives people to commit gender-based violence. So having delivered that presentation just a couple of weeks before, all of a sudden I found myself a victim of gender-based violence, although not in the traditional sense, because obviously in general, we tend to think of GBV as men perpetrating violence against women. And this was obviously the exact opposite. And long story short, I arrived home. The relationship had been a little bit rocky. And I was out at meetings in the morning, and my girlfriend kept sending me messages around, I need to be paying some of her debt, her son's school fees. And I simply sent back saying, well, I'm no longer prepared to pay. I haven't got the cash right now to pay any more of your expenses. She then sent me photographs of equipment and my personal belongings, saying, she could sell these to generate the funds to pay her accounts. So when I arrived home later, just after lunchtime, not surprisingly, the atmosphere was a little bit icy. But she again confronted me and said, well, I need to make these transfers today to pay some of her debts. And I said to her, look, number one, I'm not paying any more of your debts. And secondly, we need to have a serious talk about this relationship. And that was the trigger that just set in motion a physical attack that lasted probably around 20 minutes, which started with her just ripping my Kindle out of my hands, throwing it across the room, storming out of the room where I was, out the back door, through the court, across the courtyard to where I had my home offices, and she had offices there as well. Upturned my entire desk. And at this point, I'm following her around, just in total disbelief. She then walked up to me, ripped my glasses off my face, literally broke them in 4 pieces, told me that she was then going to crash my car. So she walked back across the courtyard into the house. I managed to get to my car keys before she did, and then proceeded to follow out the kitchen door to the garage, where there was a wall of drawers and cupboards in front of my vehicle. And she opened a drawer, took out a 5-pound hammer. And it was at this point where I thought, this is just not on, something weird's going on, and would I need evidence at a later stage? So I started recording the incident on my phone. She took out a 5-pound hammer. I thought she was going to trash my car with it. And then she came at me with the hammer. Now, being fairly Afrikaans, well, growing up very Afrikaans, obviously I was taught you're never violent towards a woman, you don't fight back, you don't get physical with a woman. So I was just kind of recording this, and she came at me swinging the hammer. Missed me a couple of times. I then started walking away from her, took blows on my back, my body. Somehow we then ended up in the bedroom, where she pushed me onto the bed, got on top of me and started hitting me with the hammer until I got this glancing blow on my forehead, just above my left eye. And the minute that started bleeding, the attack stopped. And then she instantly said, kind of feigned remorse and wanted to know if there's anything she can do for me, how can she help me? So now I'm a little bit disoriented. I've got blood streaming down my face. I haven't got my glasses and I can't really see where I'm going. And went to try and find help from neighbors. And I lived on an estate where the houses are quite far apart. Walked across to one neighbor, they weren't at home. I then figured, well, I need to get myself out of this situation. So I phoned my best friend. He was on an airplane, so I phoned his wife. We were on a FaceTime call, and she said to me, look, Erik, just get in the car and get out of there, go anywhere. I said, well, but I can't see. When I then got in my car to drive away, my girlfriend then ripped the car keys from the car. So now I can't start the car. Now I don't go anywhere. And eventually then other neighbors arrived because they'd seen me wander around the estate all bloodied and not looking great. And from there on, my friend had landed at the airport close to the house. He came to fetch me, took me off to hospital, where I got stitched up. And then from then on, it was obviously this case of what does one do now? And do we stay silent? Does this just become a personal thing? And the journey kind of then just took its own course from there. I was fortunate in that I had friends that I can go and stay with at night. There's no ways I'm staying in my own house now with this kind of threat. And I basically let her know that she needs to get out of the house by the Saturday evening, the following afternoon, at which point I went back there. She was still there. Her brother had arrived. And his attitude was like, oh, but you guys can talk about it and sort it out. Which clearly was not going to be an option. And when I got back home that afternoon, she was there with the police. which I still can't figure out why she managed to get the police there. But I mean, I'd reported the incident that morning, and she moved out. She left. Obviously, all her stuff still in the house. I said to her she needs to take what she needs now, and we could make an arrangement under police escort and supervision for her to come back to the house. What I didn't know at the time is that she'd stolen house keys. And a week later, while I was traveling internationally, she let herself back into the house. The estate, in terms of a security perspective, were completely uncooperative. Obviously contacted them. I said, look, this is the incident. Please remove her access from the estate. And their attitude basically was, well, we don't get involved in domestic issues. It's not our problem. But she's not a homeowner. So no, they refused to revoke her access. So when I was overseas and having had keys to the house, she came back in and literally cleaned out the entire house. Took obviously her stuff, took a bunch of my stuff, and cleaned out the entire house. 2 weeks later, when I was overseas on another trip, she even came back and stole my dogs. And this was, as I say, October 2019. And then COVID happened. And even though I'd laid charges at the police, I didn't expect anything to happen.
I'm really sorry for the experience that you had in your relationship. And thank you for having the guts to share that with us. Were there any warning signs or red flags that you picked up during your relationship with this lady?
So I can't say that there was a definitive moment where I realized that, this could turn violent. Her as a person, she had a kid. I had my twins, and she was very particular with the kids around, violence never solves a problem. In terms of disciplining the kids, it was never around smacking them or anything like that. So she seemed to have it really together. But as her business was battling and the financial stuff on her side became tougher, more and more of that got pushed onto me. But there was never really like red flags to say that this could turn violent. It's a really difficult question to answer because there was nothing overt that made me think that she has the capacity to turn violent. If we look really hard for red flags, things that were there definitely was a temper at times, although never directed towards me, but directed to business associates, other clients of hers, not to their face, but behind their back. And sometimes the way she interacted with my ex-wife, my kid's mother, there were one or two really loud and pushing and pulling altercations, which just astounded me. But nothing overt to make me think that this could turn violent towards me.
I understand that, and how many of us or the survivors out there of gender-based violence also fall into the trap of always believing that people are the best. We don't want to see the bad side of people. So I do understand that. I think many men in South Africa feel ashamed that they are part of the domestic violence statistics. Was it difficult for you to stand up and seek help?
I think the reason men battle to acknowledge this largely has to do with men in general's position in society, particularly if you think of cultural nuances within the South African context. So men are always seen as the strong guy, the breadwinner, the head of the house, the man, the breadwinner, the person with the ego. And I think that makes it inherently difficult for men to admit, certainly to their circle, that they do suffer abuse. But we also have to understand that there's the physical abuse, which is easy to identify. Someone punches you, hits you, or you end up with 12 stitches above your eye. But what is far more difficult to detect is the emotional abuse, where women are often when there is an abusive relationship between a man and a woman, women seldom become physical, but they often become emotional abusers, threatening the man with leaving them or taking the kids or divorce, and I've been through all of that as well. So it's far more nuanced than physical violence. So men experience it, I think, more than anybody actually realizes. And men don't talk about it because, number one, I don't think they've got anybody to talk to. In my mind's eye, I sort of imagine that, when the group of ladies get together and they're best friends and, they can talk about emotional stuff. Men don't talk about emotional stuff. Even my best mate who came to rescue me after the attack, we've been friends for close to 20 years, but we've never had like that sort of discussion of, my life really sucks, or I'm getting abused by my wife or girlfriend. So men don't talk about it, which kind of elevates the gravity of what they experience because there's no way of sharing it. There's no way of letting it out. And men, particularly like the older generations, have been taught, you just suck it up, you deal with it. And I think a lot of men still perceive that as kind of admitting defeat, that I don't have my shit together. And that's why men don't talk about it. They don't admit it. And I think often they don't believe it, that it's actually happening to them either.
Yes, I agree. And I think more men should stand up. We always hear about the ladies and the children, but there's more men in South Africa that also needs to be heard. So thank you for standing up. In one of your articles that I read, you mentioned that you recorded the incident that took place. What pushed you to take that step? What was your thoughts regarding that?
I honestly can't think that there was at any time during the incident, and it came out in the trial in court as well, where the prosecutor said to me, well, you could have been killed. Did you fear for your life? But at the time, I can't definitively say that there was a time when I thought, I could die now, and this could be the end of me. And I think partly had to do with, she wasn't very strong. It was a 5-pound hammer. She could barely swing it around. Incidentally, the drawer next to the drawer that she opened that had the hammer in had an axe in. And would I have responded differently if she hauled out an axe than to a hammer? I don't know. So why did I start recording it? It's actually difficult to answer. It was as though something said to me that I could need this in the future. And let's be honest, no one's going to believe me when I tell them that my girlfriend attacked me with a 5-pound hammer. So I started recording that. And, obviously we've looked at that recording countless number of times with the court case and things as well. And so there is a time in that video where I'm walking away from, I've turned my back on, I'm walking away and I'm literally just recording it over my shoulder, where I say to camera that, this is what's happening. I'm walking away from this confrontation. She's following me. I am scared for my life. And I can hear myself saying it, but I can't reconcile that I actually really felt that. And that could be attributed to just the lifestyle that I have in terms of the expeditions and the adventures and the number of times I put myself in harm's way willingly. But I recorded it because I thought something could go south now. And actually it was probably more that, my insurance companies aren't going to believe me when I tell them my car's been destroyed by my girlfriend with a hammer. So that's why I started recording it. And when it came to the court case, even though we had the footage, it was never shown to the court, which I also thought was interesting. But it laid a strong enough foundation for the state to prosecute.
Yeah, I think that's one of the main reasons why men don't report the abuse, because it's difficult to understand. And I think the myth is out there that says men don't get abused. It's normally the men who abuse. How did you cope emotionally in the aftermath after the attack?
I don't think we can ever underestimate the power of a support network and close friendships. And where we lived was fairly isolated, just outside of Johannesburg. But the fact that I could get onto a FaceTime or a video call with people who I trust, who support me, to help me through the immediate aftermath. So now we're talking like literally the first 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes after the attack. And the fact that, friends would come out and fetch me. And part of coming to fetch me is my mate couldn't even get into the estate because his driver's license had expired and they wouldn't let him through the gate. So the estate manager had to come fetch me at my house and drive me up to the entrance to the estate where, he then picked me up and we went off to hospital. But so that's like one friendship. Straight after that, I could phone another friend who had a spare bed and room in his house because I didn't want to go back to my house, which is like really intense if you think about it as well. So I didn't want to go back to my house because I'm now actually fearing that what if I fall asleep and she attacks me again, or she has got access and she could come back during the night. So I could phone another friend who had a spare bed, and he was like, by all means, once you finish at the hospital, come through, because I went home, fetched some clothes, went through to their house. And they actually had their daughter's 21st birthday party at the house that night. And he said to me, look, understand there's a party here, but please feel free. You're welcome. We need to look after you. Come through. And of course, then the number of, essentially kids, 21-year-olds. Now I'm sitting there with stitches and a bandage, and they're like, geez, dude, what happened to you? No, my girlfriend attacked me with a hammer. No way. And so even that, so that really helped. And then, 18 months later, a year odd later when it went to court, then also just the support of my late mom, family and friends was really, really instrumental.
What was your experience when seeking help legally and at the police station?
The evening straight after the attack, when the attack happened, I went to hospital, got stitched up, went home to collect clothes. And then it was a question of which police station to go to. So I went to Douglasdale, who then told me where I live, that's not in their jurisdiction, so no, they can't help me. I should go to Diepsloot. And by then it was late that evening. So I just went to my other friend's house and I was feeling pretty rotten as well. So first thing the next morning, I go to Diepsloot. And they said to me, sorry, can't help you, not in our jurisdiction. You should go to Erasmia. Went off to Erasmia police station. And they said to me, okay, no, you're at the right place now, we can help you. That was the only frustrating part of the whole experience. The guys at Erasmia said, now dealing with laying a charge, filling in a report, all of that was so professionally handled. I obviously can't speak from a woman's perspective in dealing with the police, but once they got over the disbelief that really a woman attacked you, I'm 6 foot, I'm fairly big or strongly built. The first question is, but why didn't you defend yourself? And it came out in court as well. Why didn't you defend yourself? And even though I've got the skills to disarm her, I can tell you now that if I'd done that and she'd ended up on the ground with an injury, a broken arm from me defending myself, I would have been locked up straight away and charges brought against me, because that's just the way society is kind of thinking. It's violence against women, not gender-based violence against men. So I had that restraint to just kind of take the beating. And so once it then got into the legal system, we laid the charges, the police took the statements. She arrived at the police station at the same time that I was there. I can't remember if it was probably to file counter charges and whatever, but they basically took her statement. Next step was to then issue a warrant of arrest, which I'm trying to think now if it happened immediately or if it happened. No, so that was immediate in the next couple of days, where the police actually said to me, we want you to come with us. So they came to fetch me at my house. We went to the address where she said she was staying to execute an arrest warrant. And that was done very professionally. The police were great. Then COVID hit. And I wasn't, then it kind of slips off everybody's radar. And February 2021, out of the blue, I get a phone call from the investigating officer saying, and they deliver a subpoena because it's now been set down for trial for court. Charges are assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm and malicious damage to property. And then it went to court May, June 2021, with one postponement after another. She declined legal aid representation, then she wanted it, then she fired 2 legal aid attorneys. And so that then dragged on. The verdict was only delivered August 2021. So that was like 3-4 months of court appearance after court appearance, and handled really well, in my opinion, by the state prosecutor. They were absolutely ecstatic when they got a guilty verdict. The prosecutor was happy. The investigating officer from the police actually came and like big smile, high-fived me. They were so thrilled to get a verdict, which leads me to believe that getting these guilty verdicts aren't easy. But they did it, and it's signed, sealed, and delivered. She was sentenced 12 months imprisonment, suspended for 5 years, on the condition that she does not commit a similar offence and that she pays me the value of damage to property.
What forms of support did you have after the incident took place?
So in terms of my recovery and emotional support, that initially came from my friends. But then, life takes over. And I had such a hectic travel schedule for the rest of October, November of that year that I didn't really give it any thought. I sort of immersed myself in my work and kind of forgot about it. But once the court proceedings then started gaining momentum, I think the support from state legal services, the police, was actually better than I expected. I didn't initially expect the thing to go to trial. I thought it would just disappear. But they really had a really deep understanding of the trauma and the effect of that. The trial was so interesting as well because she decided to represent herself after having fired 2 legal aid appointed attorneys. And in what on paper and in practicality appeared to be a really simple case to prosecute, and from my side. Once, she then had the opportunity to obviously put me under cross-examination, which I think lasted for 3 hours on a relatively simple matter. And there were times during that where she would really verbally bully me because I think she just watches too many legal shows on TV. But and there were times when I would look at the prosecutor and I'm expecting him to jump up like in the movies and say objection, and he just sat there. And at one of the recesses I said to him, dude, help me out a bit. I'm feeling like I'm being victimized again. Her defense, by the way, was that because I'm a behavioral strategist, I'd been manipulating her over a period of months into this position where she physically attacked me and abused me for gain on my side. But the prosecutor then said to me you know what? She's actually just prosecuting herself because of her line of questioning. And she was admitting through presenting her own defense that, yes, she had attacked me with a hammer, but then tried to justify it. And, this whole concept of justifying behavior actually came out so interestingly with everybody once they asked me what happened. And, I'd say, my girlfriend attacked me with that. You know what the very next question was in every interaction? with doctors, with even the police, with everybody is, geez, dude, what did you do? And it really just highlights kind of how society thinks, is that, well, it's abnormal for someone to hit another person with a hammer. But what did you do to justify it? And like, let's be honest, there's absolutely nothing that anyone can do that should be able to justify abuse. You know, people say to me, did you cheat on her? No. Did you do this? Did you do that? But even if I had, how does that justify this degree of physical violence and abuse?
So looking back, even if you had a great experience by reporting, what do you think, or why do you think that men in South Africa don't report domestic abuse?
I think the biggest factor that stops men from reporting it and speaking about it is the fact that they might lose face, might lose their standing in society, might lose their standing amongst their friends. And how that would, or how that could potentially cause doubt in their circle of friends. You know, like your girlfriend hit you with a hammer. Geez, dude, what did you do? Well, why should you have to do anything or not do something to justify abuse? So that is what keeps men from speaking up. And, you know, even when some newspapers and magazines contacted me, and, you know, we contacted some magazines as well, because I felt this was a story that needed to be heard, or a story that needed to be told, but because men don't. And I think a lot of it has to do with our standing in society and how people perceive men should always be strong and internalize pain, grief, etc. But, you know, any advice to men is no one's going to hold it against you. If you're a victim, you're a victim. And you deserve justice in the right way and through the right channels. And the only way you'll ever get that is by telling your story, having the courage to tell your story. Because telling the story, making the decision to leave an abusive relationship, that takes far more courage than it does to remain silent. But we think that by remaining silent, we're courageous. No. By remaining silent, we're playing an active part in perpetuating abuse. The World Health Organization did a study on gender-based violence in South Africa in, I think, 2016. And the really scary trend that emerged from that isn't just what gender-based violence is perpetrated about, but the level of agreement or acceptance between both men and women of when it is acceptable to perpetrate violence against a woman. And, you know, to quote some silly statistics, 3% of men and women agree that it is okay to be abused if you burn dinner. It boggles the mind. You know, we'll happily share those statistics, but the important thing there isn't the number, isn't the percentage. It's the difference in agreement between men and women. And across all the aspects that the World Health Organization mentioned or measured, men and women within a percentage point or two agreed that if she goes out without asking permission, if she has an affair or if he has an affair, the percentage of men and women who agree that it is okay to engage in violent behavior as a result of something like that is negligible. And so it's the level of acceptance that continues to perpetrate abuse.
Yeah, I think most men feel shameful to report abuse. Like you said, it's difficult for them because they are the masculinity figure and the head of a house, and they are supposed to be strong, and cowboys don't cry. From your professional perspective as a behavioral strategist, what should society understand under the psychological impact of men that's abused?
The key principle for me that stands out is something called the halo effect. And when we look up to people. When we see them as role models, we literally put a halo around their head, hence the name. And this will continue to be perpetrated for as long as the youth see it happening. So ultimately this idea of social proof says that people will do what they see other people doing. So as long as our kids are growing up witnessing gender-based violence, physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, they will continue to perpetrate it because it is seen as a social norm. But the only way to break that cycle is to speak up. And whether it's you speaking up about what's happening to you or you speaking up about what's happening to somebody else, that needs to happen because the law is there. The law is there to protect you. The police are ready to prosecute. The states are ready to prosecute. But it requires us to break the cycle by speaking up and not by default showing acceptance when we don't say anything.
Yeah, no, I have to agree with you on that. What message will you give to other men living in abusive relationships and that feel trapped and don't know how to get out of it?
So we're currently in the middle of this campaign of 16 days of activism. And think about the number of years that we've focused on these 16 days of activism. And what has changed? It almost gets to the point of what I call slacktivism, and that it's great to be talking about a campaign, but that's not really making a difference. What we need to do is we need to provide support for the men who we know are suffering abuse. We need to encourage them to speak out. We need to encourage them to speak up. And as we have this halo effect by looking at people's behavior and copying that, how about we create a hero effect for the men who speak up against emotional abuse, physical abuse, that they're suffering from their girlfriends, wives, life partners. Because without speaking up, without speaking up and without having the courage to make a change, we just talk about it. And we'll talk about it every year for 16 days in December. And it's not really going to be changing. And we need to stop accepting the cycle of abuse. But that's not just from the side of men supporting men. Women need to call out women as well. Because that's how we start changing social norms.
Thank you so much, Erik, for availing yourself and sharing this experience with us. I really do appreciate and I honor you for speaking up and standing up against gender-based violence. I think it's necessary to remember that gender-based violence affects everyone. So if you know of a victim that is being abused, please stand up and speak out. Together we can fight it.
In South Africa, thousands of women and children face violence every single day. Behind every statistic is a story, a family, a life changed forever. For more than a century, the SAVF has stood as a pillar of hope, protection, and dignity, walking alongside survivors long before the 16 days of activism begins and long after it ends. At the SAVF, our mission is simple yet powerful: to protect the vulnerable, restore dignity, and empower survivors to rebuild their lives. Every year, thousands of South African women and children turn to the SAVF for safety, counseling, social support, and intervention. Our social workers stand at the front line, listening, guiding, and advocating when voices are silenced. Because GBV is not just a crime, it is a human rights violation, one that destroys families, futures, and communities. Through early intervention programs, trauma counseling, outreach services, safety planning, and partnerships with communities, SAVF offers survivors not only help, but hope. The 16 days of activism is more than a campaign. It is a call to action. A reminder that ending violence starts with all of us, in our homes, our schools, our workplaces, and our communities. You are not alone. At SAVF, someone is always ready to listen, support, and help you reclaim your strength. Stand with us, speak out, support survivors, choose courage, choose compassion, choose change. During these 16 days and every day, the SAVF stands firm against violence and for the future of every woman and child in South Africa.